Another week, another hyper-violent gore fest. I didn't plan for this, it was a happy little accident, as Bob Ross would say. Anyways, like I said with the last one, if you have any problems with gore dismemberment, feel free to skip and come back for the next one. For those of you who are sticking around, feel free to share on top of the usual liking and commenting, and if you're new here, hi, I do weekly videos, and if you could just hit that subscribe button on top of all the other stuff I mentioned, that would be sick. With that out of the way, look, I needed something to round out Spooktober, I didn't feel like falling back on Resident Evil, and I know what the general reception to the Callisto Protocol was when it first released. It was generally agreed upon to not be that great, and that's not even getting into the PC-specific issues. Let's stick a pin in those for later. For the time being, I ask that you look into your hearts, and to let me cook, as the kids say. Because underneath all those things I brought up and more, there's the seed of an interesting video game buried underneath. With that out of the way, let's do this. Hey, this is Editor Mo chiming in real quick. Yes, it turns out over the weekend, the video got hit with a copyright strike because of the use of It's Always Sunny music. So, it got bitten to the algorithm, so I'm just re-uploading it with this. So you can just imagine where the music is. Here, let me do it for you. The Callisto Protocol is a science fiction survival horror game developed by Striking Distance Studios and published by Krafton. The former is a studio comprised of a lot of veterans of the Dead Space series, whose founder, Glenn Schofield, is also the creator of Dead Space. And the latter is the primary publisher of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. They also recently acquired both Tango Gameworks and the Hi-Fi Rush IP and proceeded to invite the entire studio back, whilst also bankrolling a sequel. That is awesome! Krafton aside, if you thought the comparisons were going to stop there, I wish they would. But they don't. They keep going. It's set in a corporate-controlled hellscape in space that is being controlled, /monitored, /overseen by an Illuminati-style conspiracy. You play as a blue-collar working everyman who's trying his best to get the fuck out of Dodge from a mysterious outbreak, and he occasionally has hallucinations. And that's just the surface-level stuff. I wish I could talk about the Callisto Protocol under its own merits, but I can't. The circumstances of its creation and the subject matter that it deals with make allusions and comparisons to Dead Space almost inevitable.
Yeah, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And yes, while I understand that there are some key differences, such as you being primarily in a prison as opposed to a mining ship, I gotta get to the plot to talk about that stuff. The Callisto Protocol takes place a couple hundred years in the future and follows Jacob Lee, a shipping captain who's working a routine job for the United Jupiter Company when his ship is boarded by a group called the Outer Way. After his ship crashes on the Jovian moon of Callisto, he's interned into Black Iron Prison, the UJC's privately owned prison colony. After getting processed, the prison is eventually flooded with weird, fucked up looking mutants. From here, Jacob embarks on a desperate struggle for survival and to learn more about the prison and its history in the process. As far as narrative setups go, this is as good as it gets. On paper, this is just Escape from New York meets John Carpenter's The Thing in space, or a modern Chronicles of Riddick. That is so extremely up my alley. But while I really like what the game is from a setting standpoint, the problem is that the Callisto Protocol doesn't do anything interesting with it. It immediately begins to focus on what the hell the mutants are, and as you make your way through the prison, you begin to find more and more audio logs detailing a lot about what was going on before the outbreak, and also planting seeds for an eventual sequel. While Jacob himself isn't anything to write home about, some of the other characters are pretty good. I at the very least love Captain Leon Ferris. This is primarily because he's played by Sam Witwer, and I love that dude. Ferris is a sadistic asshole that knows he's a sadistic asshole and absolutely revels in it. Sam Witwer's really good at chewing through scenery like it's going out of style, and to see him play a character that's somewhat soft-spoken is always a treat. I fucking love it. I just wish there was more that I could think of mentioning, because outside of the basic premise, I can barely remember the story. I can't tell you much of what happened outside of how you eventually find out that the whole outbreak was caused by the Warden because he's a part of the not Illuminati and was doing this to force human evolution to make humans survive in space better. As a result, the narrative ends up being a complete nothing, and that sucks, because the way I described it on paper, which is Escape from New York meets The Thing in Space, sounds awesome! But the real meat and potatoes I want to talk about regarding the Callisto Protocol is more so in the gameplay, which is where the majority of my thoughts are on. So let's just go straight to there. The gameplay of the Callisto Protocol is that of survival horror. You know, limited inventory space, scary monsters, areas that'd make you feel genuinely creeped out, the works. And you can also see some similarities to Dead Space. The UI is limited to Jacob's neck, mimicking Isaac's rig HUD, weird fucked up mutants, an absurdly cool piece of tech that mimics the gravity gun from Half-Life 2, you get the idea. Like me, this all gets thrown through a loop by way of combat. You see, when you get through a lot of sneaking past the weird fucked up mutants, you find out that just shooting them isn't enough to kill them. You need to kill them by damaging them enough through blunt force trauma. First through a crowbar, and then from an upgradable stun baton. You can go for light attacks and heavy attacks and bob and weave. Wait. Melee combat that is based on dodging left and right? Light and heavy attacks depending on the occasion and opening? Later combat encounters that are fucking bullshit at times? This is just fucking Punch-Out! You might think that this is me knocking on the Callisto Protocol. I'm not. The fact that Striking Distance had so many ways to handle melee combat, that the route they went with was through Punch-Out of all things, will never not be funny to me. And I'm not being mean here. The combat for the Callisto Protocol had me in this weird rhythm of doing melee along with the occasional shooting. It also helps that when you do enough damage, you can whip out your firearm of choice for massive damage like the gun counters in Space Marine 2. Which, can we make that a standardized thing in action games moving forward? Like, you damage an enemy or counter them so hard that they get stunned, and you get a prompt to whip out your gun and shoot them for massive damage? That would be so sick. Unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The melee combat can grind to a screeching halt if you fight more than 2 enemies, so if you get swarmed, you're out of luck, which under normal circumstances will be fine since it's trying to be a horror game at times. But the Callisto Protocol throws upwards of a dozen enemies at you at any given time, and it sucks. It's a practice a friend and I coined a decade ago called dude throwing because the game is just throwing dudes at you. But then you get out of the prison, it gets more noticeable. For starters, the moon of Callisto is a frozen wasteland. Oh hi, Tal Volantis. This means that the enemies are going to pretend to be frozen to get you. I actually like this a lot. It's doing a neat thing. But then you go underground for the next stretch and it introduces a bunch of blind enemies. These enemies are tough as fuck, and if they so much as hear a gunshot, all of them, regardless of where they are gonna pull up and beat your ass. Which is where the stealth comes in. You get a tutorial early on, but I never used it outside of a few instances when I bust out the prison robots, which are fucking terrifying if I might add. You crouch down, you crouch walk, and then you stab them senseless with your shiv, which is actually just a whittled down wrench that you keep with you the entire game, even when you're wearing this cool looking environment suit. I have nothing else to add on that, I just think it's funny. From there, you could chain together stealth kills, which weirdly don't alert the other blind enemies despite how loud they feel. I use this to clear out most of these guys in those areas lickety-split. And outside of the chapters where you're underground, oh, I forgot to mention, you go to the underground remains of the original mining colony the prison was built on top of, where the virus originated. Outside of those underground bits, you are never incentivized to use stealth. And this is deeply frustrating, because the Callisto Protocol feels like it's 2 games that's at war with itself. One half is this melee-based stealth horror game where you need to be quick on your feet to survive, and the other half is just trying to ape Dead Space super hard. Let me explain. The half that tries to ape Dead Space by giving you a bunch of weapons, 2 pistols, 2 shotguns, and an assault rifle at the end. They're used for the gun follow-up attacks when damaging enemies and are good there, but outside of that, they feel kinda weak. Or at least they didn't feel good to use. This is also annoying because the game was cool with you fighting shit because you are never hurting for ammo or health. Once. And I guess the guns feeling weak is my fault because I wanted to upgrade all my stuff equally, so fuck me, I guess. Anyways, you also get the GRP, or grip, which is the Callisto Protocol's version of the Kinesis module. The main difference is that you can upgrade it for increased velocity and charge. Oh, and you can use it to yeet enemies. This is shown by way of there being fans and grinders and spike walls to just throw mutants into. They expect you to use the grip a lot, and I did, because it was kind of awesome. This is where the aping of Dead Space started to be too much, because I had also played through the Dead Space remake on the channel last week, and it was just reminding me of how much more interesting that game was. And I hate that I'm thinking that, because if you went in either direction with the Callisto Protocol, which is to focus on the guns, grip, and enemies mutating into new forms, you'd have a decent Dead Space homage. And if you had stuck with the melee and stealth, you'd have a great stealth horror game that was heavily evocative of Escape from Butcher Bay or Assault on Dark Athena, and that would have been rad. But ultimately, it tries to be both of these things, does neither particularly well, and it's frustrating. It's so goddamn frustrating. Especially with that second idea. The seeds of an interesting stealth horror game are in the Callisto Protocol, but it can't figure out what it wanted to be, and that sucks. Because I kinda like this game. Let's just move on. You know those PC issues I stuck a pin into at the beginning? Let's go back to those real fast. The Callisto Protocol has been out for almost a year, and in that time, Striking Distance has managed to get pretty much all of the issues with performance just ironed out. And that's great, because this game is fucking pretty as hell. I'm not much of a technical graphics guy, but the realistic sci-fi art style on display is done wonderfully. All of the characters look great, and Black Iron itself almost feels like a real character despite you only going through the game in a straight line. It's all fantastic. I had some hiccups, but I'm on older hardware and it held up remarkably. I did notice that when I got achievements on the Epic Store version, that the game just randomly stopped, and that's weird. But that's not really a deal breaker if I'm being honest. The Callisto Protocol is a game that had a lot of potential to be fucking awesome, and it ended up being just okay. Normally, I wouldn't be let down by this, but when the game is firing on all cylinders, it can be fantastic. The fact that I can't see it like that all the time is unfortunate. But I ultimately ended up liking the Callisto Protocol enough to finish it, and it only took me 7 hours to get through its 8 chapters. If you want to see it for yourself, wait for a sale because I hesitate to recommend a stint of Black Iron at full price. And with that, Spooktober has drawn to a close. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you all for watching not only this video until the end, but all the other things that I put out this month. These have probably been some of my favorite videos that I've ever made, and this was an interesting experience in terms of video making. We're going to be going back to the regularly scheduled content style, and there's some stuff coming out in the next few weeks I'm excited for. So thank you all for watching, safe tidings, and Halloween!